Hello, what's going on, guys? I'm glad you're listening, and welcome to the podcast that will definitely shame you for that third shot of tequila last night. I am your host, Trent Williams, and this is Birds of a Feather, Drink Together. Let's get it on. Working in the service industry can be crazy, a volatile lifestyle. Since I have about 8 years of experience doing this kind of work, I feel like I can speak on this. The service industry has instilled a tremendous work ethic in me, paid my bills, and even taught me some skills that I've been able to take to other aspects of my life. But on the other hand, I credit some bad habits that I struggle with today to doing this kind of work. I've got the wonkiest sleep schedule on the planet. I've dabbled in drugs, alcohol, and fed into a smoking addiction that I can't seem to shake. I've even got an arrest record for a cherry on top. Not that I'm some kind of martyr for the servers and bartenders of the world, but obviously my experience has put some things in perspective for me. Now, there's a little bit of stigma surrounding alcoholism within restaurant work. People liken servers to alcoholism because they are young, and that's just what young people do. They drink. But I think there's more to it than that. So my aim was to tackle the elephant in the room. Does working in a restaurant make you more susceptible to alcoholism? I feel like everybody knows about it, but very few ever talk about it. Drinking in excess is almost glorified and the fuel for the party in an industry that fuels the party. So the first step was to start digging into some research to see if anyone else had tried to answer this question. There were actually several studies conducted around the world on the same issue. A study in Norway found that you are 2.8 times more likely to be a heavy drinker if you work in an establishment that allows drinks after work. Another study in Australia, focusing on the mental health of young apprentice chefs, found that 70% of their subjects had scores displaying problem drinking. But the study that grabbed my attention the most was out of Ireland. Now, this wasn't a survey like the rest. This study was a collection of objective interviews. They basically asked some questions about the job duties, differences between the bars, and the social aspect of each establishment. From there, they just kind of let the conversation go. And naturally, just like they thought it would when you get a group of servers and bartenders talking shop, the war story started to come out. So after analyzing the transcripts from these interviews, they developed a theory. The theory was that there are 4 main themes of immersion into the service industry, followed by a realization of costs associated with the lifestyle, and finally a burnout or distancing from the environment. The main themes of immersion begin with getting used to the high levels of stress involved with the job duties. This is followed by a social contract and dealing with ill-mannered customers. All of this leads to becoming drinking buddies, naturally. At this point, the cost of the lifestyle is realized. A healthy sleep schedule is out of the question because late nights run into early mornings. Relationships with those outside of work are sidelined because of the typical work schedule that runs opposite of those with 9-to-5 jobs. Diet and exercise are even hard to keep up with. It's a lifestyle that is unsustainable and bound to crash and burn. So with that realization starts a gradual distancing from the environment. One starts to slowly remove themselves from the job and all that comes with it, either by cutting back hours, avoiding social outings, or finding another job altogether. So with these studies conducted across the world, I can definitely see that the problem exists. Restaurant workers tend to drink more. The next step was to take this theory and see if I could make it more specific to Boise. After conducting my basic research, I decided that I wanted to compare this problem to the environment in Boise. I created a Google Forms survey and posted it to 2 social media outlets to see what kind of feedback I could get. One, to a GroupMe chat called The Syndicate, which consists of 300 plus members who work in the service industry, specifically downtown, as a way to communicate all sorts of stuff. I also posted it to Bartenders of Idaho, which is a Facebook group that is essentially the same thing. So let's break down my survey. My sample group consisted of 130 industry people, assumably all within the downtown Boise area. The group consisted of 85% servers bartenders, with the rest about an even split between management and cooks. Age varied within the group, 40% being over age 30, 37% between 25 and 30. The sample group had a lot of experience in the industry, with 64% having worked in the industry for over 5 years, 40% of that over 10 years, and half of the sample group is working full-time. So that's a lot of numbers at once, but to generalize, this group has a lot of experience. It's safe to say that the majority of this group has made serving and bartending a career. We're talking about professionals here. Now let's move on to the fun stuff. We have an idea of what the sample group looks like, so let's talk about some of their drinking habits. Of the group, 52% said they were drinking 4 or more days a week. 15% of that are daily drinkers. When they're going out for drinks, it was reported that 54% of the group were drinking 3 to 4 beverages. Another 23% reported drinking 5 or more. So about 3/4 of our group are having at least 3 drinks several nights a week. Depending on how long they're staying out, these amounts will most likely put you over the legal BAC. This brings me to my next topic. Of the group, 28.1% said that they had been arrested in an alcohol-related incident. So about 1 in 4 have either a PI or a DUI or something along those lines under their belt. Now, if you're wondering whether or not these people are doing this while at work, I have an answer for that too. It's 42%. Almost half of the group reported that they drink or do drugs on shift. So that makes you wonder whether or not each establishment has rules against this behavior. So then I asked, is employee drinking allowed within your establishment? About 40% said they were allowed to drink on shift, 27% said no, and the last 33% also said no, but acknowledged that it still happens. So again, 3/4 of the establishments downtown either allow drinking or are unaware or do not care that drinking is happening while employees are at work. Now, with that said, keep in mind that the survey was anonymous in order to get the most honest answers. So I don't know where these answers came from. Therefore, there could be some kind of sway in the numbers because it is likely that I had a bunch of people from one restaurant fill out the survey. But nonetheless, out of 130 people, about 86 of them said that either drinking was allowed or not monitored. So I decided to format the second section of my survey with some agree or disagree statements. I decided to format these questions to dig deeper into the thought process behind drinking. So I lead off with, I spend most of my free time with coworkers or industry workers because my schedule is opposite of those with day jobs. There is a solid group that feels this way because 45% either agreed or strongly agreed with this. I often drink to take the edge off after a shift. Again, this is another common theme because 62% agree. About a third of the group agrees that they drink to get drunk, and over half said they have a high tolerance for alcohol. 65% said they have at least one drink after their shift, and 54% said that they drink to deal with the stresses of people in work. So a good chunk of this group is drinking after work with coworkers, typically to unwind and possibly to get drunk. So I've identified the problem, adopted a theory, and I tested it on a local scale. The next thing I wanted to do was talk to a professional, somebody who could draw the line on what exactly alcoholism is. So I called around to at least a dozen rehab facilities in town, but I could not seem to get anyone to take an interview with me. That was until I gave Aspire Assessments and Health Resources a ring. Dee Canaday, who's the owner and treatment director of the facility, answers the phone, and to my surprise, she was willing to take an interview with me. Dee was extremely welcoming when I arrived as I set up my equipment. Her office was comfortable and homey, with a loaded bookshelf in the corner and inspirational quotes from her previous class still on the whiteboard. Just the whole vibe of the room felt like it was just asking me to drop my life story on the table. So I imagine she really knocked some of the classes out of the park if you ever need some help. She poured me a cup of coffee as I explained the purpose of my project to her a little more in depth. We talked for about an hour and had some great conversation. But here was her answer to my main question. So let's kind of just dive into it.
Okay.
One of the first things that I really kind of want to know is what is the process for diagnosing somebody that is dealing with alcoholism?
So, excuse me. What is the process? So really, when we start looking at alcoholism, or actually alcohol use disorder, is the little fancy term that we use according to the DSM-5. It's interesting because really, if you look at the criteria, it's really these 10 different symptoms or subjective information that creates this diagnosis. I think first we have to look at alcohol dependency as a medical issue.
Okay.
Because first of all, if you look at things in the medical issue, what you'll recognize is that if you go to the doctor, you tell the doctor all these symptoms, and then they're like, "Oh, you have 5 of these 7 symptoms, so you must have this disorder. Let's run some tests," right?
Okay.
Alcoholism and diagnosing any kind of substance use is kind of the same thing. We look at the symptoms, and then do they fit certain criterias? When we look at alcohol dependency, what's really interesting is when you look at the 10 areas that alcohol use impacts, only 2 of them are related to physiology. So when we start talking about is there a physical dependency, right? Really all we're looking at is your level of tolerance. The other levels of dependency when we start talking about it is how is your drinking impacting your relationships with family, with friends. Are you having problems paying your bills, right? Housing? Are you jumping couch? Are you are you having problems with the law? You know, are you getting DUIs? That should be a red flag, right? Is your transportation privileges being taken? Are you can you not drive for whatever reason? Are you like hitting things when you're driving? You know, all those count. So when we start looking at symptoms, I mean, other than the 2 physiology issues, the other 8 is mostly about interaction, social relationships, and life skills.
Dee explained to me that diagnosing alcoholism is a whole other monster. While there are tests you can take, one of the most beneficial things you can do is analyze what you have going on in your own life. Evaluating alcoholism is mostly measuring the effect that drinking has on your relationships. Dee also agrees that the stress levels associated with the industry can attribute to binge drinking. The idea that you have to fuel the party in order to make your money can be a stressor that could definitely cause somebody to drink. I think the biggest takeaway from my conversation with Dee are 3 things. 1, alcoholism and binge drinking are 2 completely different things. You can binge drink and not be an alcoholic. 2, that the root of heavy drinking, while it may be increased by some factors of working in the industry, goes deeper than the job. Lastly, one of the biggest parts of assessing alcoholism is self-analysis. You have to be able to be honest with yourself and see that drinking is what is causing the other lapses in your life. Nobody can force you to go get help unless it's court-ordered. But if that's the case, then you're a little further down the rabbit hole. So my next stop was a conversation with Shane Rose, who is a bartender at Bigger Creek Ale House. Sorry to cut you short, Shane, but here's his take on the matter.
There's all kinds of people working in that industry, of course. I don't look at everybody on our staff and think, man, what a bunch of drunks, what a bunch of alcoholics.
No.
But at the same time, and I've never thought of myself that way either. I've never had any serious issues with drinking, never had any run-ins with the law, never had any dramatic, personal things come about because of that dumb thing I did when I was drunk or anything like that.
Right.
But dude, going from working a corporate bar where there was no after work drinking culture to Bitter Creek where it is everybody's getting off and having at least 1 or 2, and some people just kick off the night there and then move on. Yeah, it's so much different. And this past I've been I worked at Bitter Creek for about a year now or a little longer.
Uh-huh.
I drank so much more beer in this last year, on a regular basis, than I ever did in my entire life.
So after speaking to everyone, I still don't think I have an exact answer to what I set out for. It's not news that servers drink more than most because alcohol is always right in their faces, and clearly there isn't one direct cause for it because the degree of alcoholism depends on the establishment. But I also don't feel like this project was a failure at all. I think being aware of the issue is the best answer I was ever going to get out of this. Tackling the elephant in the room wasn't going to happen, but at least I'm acknowledging that it's there. It's clear that based on my data, there's a bit of a drinking problem in downtown Boise within the service industry, but I'm not convinced that it's any different anywhere else you go. I think the message here is holding one another accountable. The service industry is a pretty tight-knit family, and there are a lot of positives that come from working in the right spot. When you look at downtown, you have a lot of people that have made careers out of this. So the truth is, we should make it a point to be better influences on one another. Whether that is a manager being diligent and making sure the people on the floor aren't hammered, the bartender who should be better about cutting off a friend who has had one too many, the owner who should make sure their employees have all the opportunities to live a healthier lifestyle, or the ability to look at yourself and go get help when you need it. All right, so to go ahead and wrap this up, just want to give some thanks out to those that contributed to my work. First and foremost, Dee Canaday, thank you very much for everything that you did. Your contribution helped a ton, and I learned a ton coming and hanging out with you. Thanks for taking the time out of your day. Shane Rose, again, thanks for having a beer and talking to me, brother. Finally, everybody that filled out the survey, there was 130 of you guys out there, and you did it all just kind of at the drop of the hat. So again, thanks a ton. If you guys ever catch me out, I'll buy you a beer.